It was a Sunday morning. It was still, but not quiet. I could hear 2 sets of snores coming from my parents' room. My dad's snore, close to the pillow, rumbled like an angry lion caught in a snare. My mum's snore occurred every 2 breaths and was a quick rasping sound, as if Jack the Ripper had suddenly put his hand to her throat. It was time for me to get up. The day outside was starting to chatter, and I wanted to be there. I got dressed and went out into the garden. There was still a mist rising from the dew. I could hear the knocking of a snail against the garden path. I looked to see the culprit. A blackbird tossed the carcass to and fro until the sound and the wrestling stopped. 1 breakfast eaten. There were translucent red yew berries scattered over the path. They were poisonous. Just 1 berry, I wondered, or would you have to eat many? The yew tree was the tallest in the garden and the hardest to climb. I scanned its branches for the foothold I used last summer. I looked up at its long, proud trunk and remembered how those tiny maverick twigs that were so hard to bend and snap off had scratched me again and again on my journey upwards. What was it about a yew branch that made it so bendy? It would twist and gyrate in my hand, dodging and ducking from that fine or clean snap that other tree branches allowed. Good for bows and arrows, I thought. The red berries could be rubbed on the end of the arrow. Even their needle-like leaves were poisonous. There were lots of them arranged along a spine. Sometimes they dropped off easily, forming a sort of devil's confetti over the lawn. Other times, each one needed a deliberate tug between finger and thumb. Tug. She loves me. Tug. She loves me not. Tug. I slowly made my way to the bottom of the garden, the red-eyed yew berries crunching under every step. Here was the discarded snail shell, its front door brutally forced open, hard, sharp, cracked edges where the sculptured rim had been. Nothing inside except some earth and a sudden absence. No time to pack your bags or tell your friends, just pierced by a long orange beak, snatched from everything you've known. Shelter, warmth, food, your mother, and down a gobbling, hungry throat. Here was the rockery that caught the sun in the afternoon and was like fishing about in warm rock pools by the seaside. If I turned over this large stone, suddenly a whole world was set in motion. 1,000 grey woodbugs were on the move. I was God crouching in the rockery. I could turn 1 stone and 1,000 lives would be affected, their affairs in a sudden state of disarray. I could, if I fancied, knock them off the stone so that they fell upside down from a great height. I could tread on them. No one would know. Who counted woodbugs? There would be no trial, no jury, no verdict, no sentence, no punishment. I would always be free, but I could commit acts of extreme cruelty if I wanted. I watched them running fast for cover. Some had been sleeping one on top of the other, several woodbugs deep. There were 10 in the bed, and the little one said, roll over, I sang, as I gently coaxed them from the stone with a dry twig. The woodbugs were my friends. When Dad brought wood into the fireplace to be burnt, there were often woodbugs running for their lives, sometimes whole double beds full of them. My dad just threw the logs onto the flames. Ouch, ouch, I would think as I watched their little bodies burning. Their sisters, their uncles, their little baby brothers, who were only the size of a burnt match head, all popping in the fire. I often tried to save them by picking them off the logs before my dad reappeared. 1 life saved, I thought, as I gently picked a large one from the bark. This required some skill, because if I was too firm with my finger and thumb, I could crush the little armour-plated shell. I tugged another from the moss, its many legs splayed like a swimmer in the air. Another life, I thought. How could I save them all? Who would know the terrible cruelty that went on in this living room? Would I one day grow up and tell the world? Here was the large shell, like a conch that my sister had brought back from the sea. It looked like a giant white fossilised woodbug with half its legs dislocated from its body. When it was turned over, it had a pink salmon underbelly that was smooth to touch and hadn't changed colour despite being on land for many years. It folded into a deep, dark hole where you could hear the sea, even this far inland. All you had to do was go down the hole like the rabbit in Alice in Wonderland. Perhaps if I made a special yew-berry concoction, I could shrink like Alice and then fit into its long tunnel. I stood up, forgetting how long I had been crouching down. I heard the cuckoo. It must be in one of the trees above. Cuckoo, cuckoo. Spring is here, I thought. Just then I heard water gushing from the outside pipes of the house. My parents were up. My heart thumped. Should I have brought them up tea? Was my dad angry? I stopped and listened to the sounds. A door was slammed. A window was closed. A toilet flushed. I followed their noises down to the kitchen. I could see them both by the sink. I hid from view. I suddenly remembered the dirty dishes by the sink. Was I supposed to wash them? The back door opened. That wasn't what I saw, my dad said to my mother. He cleared his throat like someone gargling backwards and spat out the phlegm into the nearby flower bed. He went inside, slamming the door. He hadn't noticed me. They were having a row. Something smashed. It sounded like glass. My mother screamed. My dad was shouting, "Bitch! Stupid bitch!" I felt sick. I was a frightened sparrow, a cornered lizard, an earwig about to be crushed. Nothing could ever prepare me for this moment. I felt like a soldier in combat waiting for a command to go into enemy territory, knowing there would be certain death. Another smash. A tinkle followed. There was crying now. It was sobbing. Who was sobbing? Did parents sob? Cuckoo! Cuckoo! I walked down to the bottom of the garden to see if there were any apples from my favourite apple tree. Here was my tree. Rotten through and through, my dad had said, kicking it with his foot. How could it be rotten but still produce such lovely apples, I wondered, pulling one gently off the tree. I bit into the round apple and felt the shiny green skin smoothing my tongue as I lined it up with my teeth. A blackbird sang from the copper beech tree. I stood still. There were no more noises now. I could hardly swallow. My stomach tightened. What was happening in the kitchen? What was my dad doing? Was my mum all right? As if asking the tree, I ran my fingers over its bark. The blackbird, looking at me from a great height, sang, bitter, bitter, bittersweet, bitter, 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 bittersweet, bittersweet. A voice shouted, Debbie, Debbie. It was my mum calling me from the kitchen door. I ran up the path, my breath laboured with the steepness and the fear circulating in me, but I hardly noticed, shrouded as I was, with the dark anticipation of what awaited me. There in the kitchen, my mum stirred the small milk saucepan on the stove with a wooden spoon. Tap, tap it went as it touched the sides. I'm making scrambled egg on toast. Do you want some? She asked, not turning round. She was still in her nightdress, no slippers on her feet. The kitchen floor was cold, I thought. Where's Dad? I asked cautiously, sitting at the table. He's gone out for the day, she said, staring out of the window. One sliced popped up, then two. I buttered them. She ladled out scrambled egg. I looked up at her and was taken aback to see black and purple bruises down her neck and a dark patch on her eye. "Are you okay, Mum?" I asked, unable to eat. "I'll live," she said, giving me a smile that opened and closed like an accordion. We ate the food in silence. I jumped up. "You don't need to wash up," she said, preempting my next move. "Go and play. I'll do it." I opened the kitchen door and went into the garden. It was now late morning, and the sun was nearly full in the sky. The starlings were tut-tutting on the telephone wires. Flies passed by without a word. "Dear God," I said as I looked up at the blue sky, "help us. Please help us." Mr. Sherwood was laying slabs on his patio next door. Bright yellow stones that came from a factory. In the summer, he went around with his belly hanging over his drawstring shorts. He was bold and always happy. I sauntered to the adjoining garden wall and peered over. It took him a while, but eventually he felt me looking at him and straightened up. "Hello," he said. He seemed pleased to see me. "Know any more jokes?" he asked. I had told him my repertoire of jokes the previous day. "No," I said, burying my head in my shoulder. Had he heard my mum and dad fighting? I wondered. If so, why hadn't he vaulted over the wall to see if my mum and me were all right? If he had heard, why was he smiling so much? "We've been out all morning getting these slabs," he said, putting his hands on his hips. Just then, there was a familiar chug, chug, chugging from the Golden Valley below. A few seconds later, a choo, 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 as the steam train to London gathered momentum. "It used to stop in Chalford when there was a station," Mr. Sherwood said as we both watched the smoke rise and fade. London was full of tall buildings and lots of people running around like tiny ants, I thought. "I'm going to London one day," I announced. Suddenly, I noticed a long bamboo stick. It had been used to tie a plant to. The green wire was still around it, but it came out of the soil easily. "Bye," I said, smiling. I had a stick, a long yellow stick with knots like my grandmother's knuckles. It was light and good to wave in the air. You could swish it and swash it, and if you whizzed it very quickly left or right, it made a cracking noise, and it made you dizzy. It was just right to hold, and suddenly I was queen again. Here were the flower beds behind the vegetable patch, out of view from the kitchen window. I banged the stick onto the grass, and it surprised a clump of earth that shot up. A hole was left in the grass. I tried it again. Whack! There were the stinging nettles I had fallen into when I was only 6. "Take this, you nasty nettles," I shouted at them. "You little bastards," I snarled, whacking them from side to side. Their long stems suddenly cut short, not even time for surprise. Caught with their mouths open, I thought. "Ha ha!" Again, I sliced their stems from the top, from the bottom, one by one, in a bunch. I had no mercy, although they begged me. We're sorry, they cried, pleading with me. But the more they pleaded, the better it felt to whack their little heads off. Their silly, white, truculent little heads off. That'll whack. Teach you, swash, to sting me. I stopped for a rest. Being a warrior with a razor-sharp sword was hard work. Aha! I spotted some chrysanthemums in the flower bed that had dried over the winter. There were several of them, all about the same height, with their heads still attached. I felt a rush of pleasure sweep my body that was a tingle of excitement and anger. Off with their heads, I shouted. Please, please, they begged. Please don't kill us. I stood still, considering their request. Please don't kill me, squeaked one in a high-pitched voice. But you can't cook properly, can you? Always food from tins. You forget to buy milk. You don't clean the house properly. You're useless, aren't you? You're a silly bitch. A silly bitch. At that moment, with a wide swipe of the stick, her head came flying off into the compost heap. It was a clean cut. There was now one chrysanthemum that was just a stalk, with no head amongst the others. Ha ha! I was pleased with my deed. An officer has to do her duty. Suddenly, without warning, I struck at the others. 1, 2, 3, 4. Heads went catapulting in all directions. Stems got sliced. Not one was spared. All women and children. A massacre. It was a massacre. I was out of breath. I had committed a terrible crime. I knew that I had. There were the 4-inch stalks in front of me, where once sleeping chrysanthemums would have blossomed. I had murdered them all in their beds. I turned around to check my mother hadn't seen from the kitchen window. I looked back at the flower bed and wondered whether she'd noticed. But the blackbird had seen. The woodbugs knew. The forget-me-not knew. Sweet William had seen. Rosemary, basil and oregano knew. The dahlias knew. The deadly nightshade had seen. Foxglove and bellflower knew. The knotweed, the snapdragon and the fuchsias had all seen. I threw the stick away, my hands in my pockets. I went down to find a slowworm in the thicket. I wouldn't apologise, I thought, not to any of them. And as I walked sulkily to the bottom of the garden, I felt their breath upon me, their whispering voices. I saw their heads and petals turn and glance in my direction, and I knew that I was bad. I knew that I was bad through and through.